Hello everyone and welcome back to the program. We're truly living in an era of big government. There seems to be no limit on the ever-expanding size and scope of human governments in our nations today. And about the only thing that grows faster than the government itself is government spending. This dangerous reality is leading to a devastating economic collapse, one that will impact you and your family. God's Word says that a day of reckoning is coming, and soon. On today's program, we'll look at this almost incomprehensible problem for what it really and truly is, and then consider what you personally should do to prepare for what's coming.
The Trumpet Daily.
A few years ago, one leading politician in the United States said, "We're not going to save our way out of this recession. We've got to spend our way out of this recession." And that's what big government has been doing. Big spending, deficit spending. No matter the crisis, the so-called solution is always to spend and to spend more. And it seems there's never a limit to the deficit spending. Here we are in another U.S. election cycle, and here in Britain, we've also had a change in leadership in recent months. And yet, it seems no matter the administration, no matter the political party, this one thing is certain: government always gets bigger, and spending always increases. We've prepared a montage for you, a collection of video clips from the past year or so. These are statements coming from the ruling class, the political establishment here in the UK, over in the United States. And as you watch these clips, you'll notice a common thread that runs right through all of these statements.
And this kind of thinking, this myth that government's always the enemy, that forgets that our government is us. It's us.
What I believe is the United States, in fact, should join the rest of the industrialized world and guarantee health care to all people.
A plan that will mean government stepping up, righting wrongs, challenging vested interests, taking big decisions, doing what we believe to be right.
We should not be paralyzed. We should not be paralyzed by the Republicans and their constant refrain, big government this, big government that, except for what they want to impose on the American people. I know we can afford it because we're going to make the wealthy pay for it. That is the way to get it done.
It's easy to dismiss them. Easy to say that all you want from government is for it to get out of the way. But a change has got to come. It's time to remember the good that government can do.
Yes, in my view, the government of a democratic society has a moral responsibility to play a vital role in making sure that all of our people have a decent standard of living.
Well, the greatest function of all by far is security for our nation. I would also say healthcare, I would also say education. I mean, there are many, many things.
And to embrace a new centre ground in which government steps up and not back to act on behalf of us all.
We got to fix the mindset that only leaves people cynical about our government. Our government is us. Of us, by us, for us, the people.
Over and again, the leaders of our nations today are proposing new government programs and more spending. It wasn't always this way. You can go back 35, 40 years ago to the early 1980s when President Ronald Reagan came into office in the United States and was talking about how that government wasn't the solution, it was the problem, and that we needed to scale back the power of government or get government out of the way. And here in the UK, Lady Thatcher was right in step with Mr. Reagan. These two political allies, they made it their mission to reduce the size of government, to eliminate bureaucracy, to eliminate government regulations, to privatize industry, to cut taxes, and to empower the individual, to empower families, to unleash enterprise. That was just, as I say, 35, 40 years ago. But look at where we are today, as you saw from that montage. Look at where we are today. Let me take you to a couple of recent quotes from This one, Fortune magazine, this is about Theresa May's recent speech. The second woman to be both Tory leader and Prime Minister of the UK signaled the clearest possible break with the Iron Lady's legacy Wednesday, turning the party sharply to the left in an effort to occupy and redefine a new center ground in the country's politics amid the uncertainties of the post-Brexit era. There are uncertainties for Britain. Same is true for the United States. And as I say, the one common theme that you hear over and over, no matter the political party, is new government programs, expand the size of government, and increase spending. Here's another piece, The Telegraph. It was an emphatic, this is referring to Ms. May's speech, it was an emphatic a repudiation of the Thatcher-Reagan economic worldview as it was possible to get without actually naming them. Time and again, she said that government was the solution, not the problem. She believes in a large, powerful, aggressively interventionist state that can, she feels, regenerate the country and protect ordinary workers. That's what so many of the leaders of our nations today believe. They believe it sincerely, and it's the same, as I say, across the pond in the United States, where half the population is receiving some kind of government handout. There was a report just recently saying that 94 million adults in the United States are not in the labor force, not working, and so they seek handouts from the government. And the government, it puts no limit on this spending. It has to pay it out. The government is there as this massive nanny state, and so much of America's budget is essentially sending checks to people or organizations. Over 2/3 of government spending is essentially writing checks to individuals. That's astounding. It's hard to even wrap your mind around it. Let's look at a couple of Proverbs. Here in Proverbs, you can see where this is leading. And it used to be that people had more common sense when it came to this subject. But you look into what the Bible has to say, and even not that far back in our own history, where the leaders of the United States and Britain wouldn't go about saying, well, we've just got to spend more as the solution. They weren't so quick to just throw money at problems as politicians are today. But look at what the Bible has to say. This is Proverbs 22 and verse 7. Very simply, it says, the borrower is servant to the lender. Now that's important because so much of this government spending is financed by borrowing, by running up the nation's credit card, so to speak. That's how so much of it's funded. How did the United States go from being the greatest creditor in the world to now it's the biggest debtor nation? We're in debt up to our eyeballs. $19-20 trillion. You look at the unfunded liabilities in the years ahead for the United States. Again, how do you even start to make a dent in $200 trillion of commitments? Trillion. 200 trillion. It's never going to be paid down. It always goes in the direction of expanding government and increasing spending, as I say. Well, what happens when, like with what happened in Britain not that long ago, what happens when the United States loses its reserve currency status? What happens when those lenders come calling for their money? What happens when there's a real crisis? Right now, of course, the United States finances a lot of its spending by just printing money. Printing money out of thin air. It's worthless. It's pieces of paper. That's all that it is. What happens when all of that comes crashing down? There's a few voices on both sides of the Atlantic that are sounding the alarm, but not nearly as many as there should be. There was a senator a few years ago, I think back in 2010, a former U.S. senator that was saying, history teaches us that we're not going to make it. That's what he said about the United States. That's just a basic lesson of history. When you get this kind of out-of-control spending, this kind of record-setting deficits, mass printing of money, History teaches us that we're not going to make it. All of this out-of-control spending. Here in the UK, there's a well-known commentator, Neil Ferguson. He said a few years ago that fiscally and other ways, America is very near the edge of chaos. Very near the edge. Let me take you to the testimony of another individual, Lawrence Kotlikoff. He gave this testimony before Congress in the U.S. Back in early 2015, just a year and a half ago. And he says here, point blank, our country is broke. It's not broke in 75 years or 50 years or 25 years or 10 years. It's broke today. Indeed, it may well be in worse fiscal shape than any developed country, including Greece. The U.S. fiscal gap currently stands at $210 trillion. This figure is my own calculation based on the Congressional Budget Office's July 2014 75-year alternative fiscal scenario projection. These are the numbers that Congress itself puts out, the Congressional Budget Office. And he says anybody that just wants to go through the figures can figure this out with a calculator or an Excel spreadsheet in a matter of 5 minutes. These kinds of commitments that no nation could keep. $210 trillion? That's crazy. That's crazy. Where's the wisdom and the common sense? Where's the basic financial principles, the basic understanding of finance and economics 101 to just know that this leads to destruction? That's what it leads to. Tim Thompson wrote for our Trumpet magazine. We offer you a free subscription to that if you like. But he wrote years ago, he used that verse over in Matthew 23 and verse 27, where it talks about, the whited sepulcher, how it looks nice on the outside, but on the inside, well, it's not healthy at all. Mr. Thompson wrote, it's beautiful on the outside. It has the appearance of wealth and well-being, but inside it's full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. It's a financial nightmare built by hypocrites and filled with all rottenness. That's what he said some 15, 20 years ago. That's what he said about America's economy. It might look good on the outside. It might seem prosperous on the outside, but it's all propped up on credit, on deficit spending. And where is it leading here in Proverbs? Let's look over at Proverbs 29. Again, this is practical wisdom right out of the Bible. This is highlighting just how important it is for us to see where this is headed. Proverbs 29, verse 18, it says, where there's no vision, the people perish, but he that keeps the law, happy is he. Without vision. You see, if we don't see where this is headed, if we don't see where this is going, God says it will lead to this. Now, there's a lot of other prophecies, of course, that factor into this, besides just the demise of the United States and Britain. We talk a lot about that, of course, in this book by Herbert Armstrong, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. It explains where this is leading. And if you haven't gotten a copy of this already, be sure to request your own free copy. This has gone right around the world to 6 million households. Millions upon millions of people have read this book. It's a powerful book that brings the prophecies of God to life so that you can see, so that you can be an individual of vision and know where this is leading. It's all explained and discussed in here. And then we also have a couple of smaller, very practical booklets of instruction that will really be helpful for you individually. Solve your money troubles. One of them here by Robert Morley, and this one here also by Mr. Armstrong, The Financial Law You Can't Afford to Ignore. We'd like to give you all of this material for free if you'll just give us a call or send us a text message. But what I was about to say a moment ago is that there's other prophecies that factor into this as well, like the fact that Herbert Armstrong said it was going to be a financial or a banking crisis that really leads to the prophecies of the seventh and final resurrection of the Holy Roman Empire in Europe, something we also talk about often on this program. But make sure that you stay tuned, get the information that you need so that you can order these booklets and Herbert Armstrong's classic work, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. We'll be right back.
Society today has more toys and conveniences than even the richest kings of antiquity ever dreamed of. Yet ironically, financial worries plague almost everyone. How could we have so much, yet be so unhappy? There's a reason for all these financial woes, and it lies in man's failure to keep God's laws regarding money. God provides a way to escape the economic problems if only man would heed his instruction as laid out in the Holy Bible. The literature on today's program will help you learn those laws.
Mankind has come up with every possible explanation to excuse debt-laden living. But as far as God is concerned, the underlying cause of this curse, and that's what it is that we're living the way of get. We're living way beyond our means. These days, of course, everybody has to get something. Washington gets an unlimited supply of credit so that it can spend and keep right on spending. And then Americans, just to use the U.S. as an example, they get all the generous handouts from entitlement programs. Politicians promise to increase benefits so that they can then get more votes. There's lobbyists there in D.C., as I'm sure there are here, that pay off the politicians and finance their campaigns to get favorable legislation for their companies. And all the while, putting it all together, we mortgage away our future by just tacking on trillions and trillions of dollars or pounds, just adding to the debt, adding to the deficit every single year. Where is it leading? Where is this leading? We've got to have the vision to see another verse here from the Psalms. This is in the Revised Standard Version. It says, "The wicked borrows and cannot pay back, but the righteous is generous and gives." You see, that's the way God sees this. When we have to look at it from God's perspective, He says the wicked borrows and they can't pay it back. How do you pay back $210 trillion in unfunded liabilities? Let me take you over to Mr. Armstrong. This is what he wrote in a 1983 article. He says, "Today Britain has lost her empire. Britain has been on the way down in national wealth and power since World War I. And now the United States is starting to follow on the downward path." He was writing this back in the days of Ronald Reagan and Lady Thatcher. He was writing that in 1983. He saw where this was headed. And look at where we are today. You look at what the empire, what the UK, the British Empire once was. Imagine this empire that spread all over the earth, that really ruled the world. Imagine if it had some of the same financial or economic policies that you see government out there proposing today, or the same with the United States. Imagine it coming to this awesome power 100 or 150 years ago, based on the philosophy of, well, we've got to spend our way out of this problem. We've got to add more to the deficit. We've got to add more to the debt. That's the way the most educated of today think. And it's foolishness. It says here, the United States and the British peoples did inherit the national and material promises of the birthright promised unconditionally to Abraham. Therefore, God has fulfilled His unconditional promise of the birthright to Abraham. Once fulfilled, he says, in the British and the Americans, retention of it by us became conditional on our performance. That's a 1983 article, but he makes the same points here in the United States and Britain in prophecy. Once God fulfilled His obligation, of course, this brings in other prophecies and, of course, the history discussed there in the book of Genesis. The promises God made to Abraham and to his descendants. All of this wealth, this prosperity, it came from God. Ultimately, it came from God originally. And then once we received it, once God fulfilled His promise, then it was on us to retain that wealth and that prosperity. It says, "And what have we done with all this vast wealth, economic prosperity, and world power. Yes, what have we done? What have we done with it? Look at what we've squandered away in just a few short decades. It says in Haggai 1 and verse 5, "Now therefore thus says the Eternal of hosts, consider your ways." That's what God thunders to our people today. He says, consider your ways. He wants for us to look at what we're doing to ourselves, to look at what we're squandering away, to look at what we're doing to our people, to look at what we're doing to each other, to ourselves. Well, it's a frightening scenario when you look at it nationally. This quote here from Herbert Armstrong, again, the same article from 1983, he says, "Already the noose is around our necks and is almost daily tightening. Economic ills are starting greatly to reduce our standard of living." See, already the noose is tightening. This is a dangerous trajectory that we're on. And do you foresee politicians or leaders that are coming along to tighten our financial belt, to reduce the size of government, to cut down or cut back on spending? You don't see that, do you? You don't see it in the United States. You don't see it here in the UK. This is just the way of man. Going back to the blessings that Herbert Armstrong talks about in the United States and Britain in prophecy, those blessings bestowed upon our peoples because of promises God made to Abraham. Well, there was a time in our history, both in Britain and in the United States, that the leaders understood that those blessings came from God. Take Abraham Lincoln as one example. That was just 150 years ago or so. He attributed the blessings, the tremendous wealth and power that America had at its disposal. He considered those blessings of God. He said, "We toiled not in the acquirement or establishment of them." We didn't acquire these ourselves because of our own ingenuity. God gave this to us. God blessed us fabulously. And now here we are, and we're squandering all of this wealth, this prosperity, this power away. And God says in Haggai, consider your ways. Consider your ways. That's Haggai 1 and verse 5. Verse 6 says, "You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but you have not enough. You drink, but you're not filled with drink. You clothe you, but there's none warm. And he that earns wages to put into bags with holes. Thus says the Eternal of hosts, consider your ways." Consider your ways. Consider where this is leading. Open your eyes and see. And see, as that one senator said, look, history teaches us. Leave aside the Bible prophecy for a moment. History teaches us that we're not going to make it. That's just the lesson of history. Look at Rome. Look at the Roman Empire. Look at other examples in history. Alexis de Tocqueville, notice what he said in Democracy in America back in the mid-1800s. Talking about government, he says, "As I see it, only God can be all-powerful without danger because his wisdom and justice are always equal to his power. Thus, there's no authority on earth so inherently worthy of respect or invested with a right so sacred that I would want to let it act without oversight or rule without impediment." See, the founders in America understood this, that we're not being ruled by angels, as it says in one of the Federalist Papers. And so they drew up all of these checks and balances to prevent one branch or another from running away with things, from getting out of control. And yet, you look at a lot of those foundational pillars in the United States, they're breaking down. Isaiah 59 here and verse 10. Let's just look at a couple more verses here before we conclude. Isaiah 59, we go through this often on our radio program, KPCG, the Trumpet Daily radio show. You can log on to our website and listen to the daily program if you'd like. We get into a lot more detail, obviously, having a daily platform to discuss many of these prophecies. Isaiah 59:10, we grope for the wall like the blind, and we grope as if we had no eyes. We stumble at noonday as in the night. We are in desolate places as dead men. I mean, that's what man does. He gropes. He doesn't know the way. God says in the prophet Jeremiah's book that it's not in man to be able to direct his own steps. We need God's guidance. But in our society today, we've shut God out, and we're going it alone, and we know more than God. And we know if we just spend money or throw money at this or expand these government programs, it'll solve all the problems of our society. That's what we think. And look at our society. Look at the problems that are mounting. Look at our people. Look at what it's doing to our people. This dependency on government, human government, like a drug. It's an addiction. Staying here in Isaiah 59, verse 20 says, and the Redeemer shall come to Zion, unto them that turn from transgression in Jacob, says the Eternal. There is a solution, in other words. God's government is coming, and it's not anything like human government. This is the family of God that's about to rule the earth, God's kingdom. That's the gospel that Jesus preached, the soon coming kingdom of God in the wonderful world tomorrow. Mr. Armstrong said the only hope of justice, of peace, of truth, of right solutions to all this world's problems is the coming in power and glory of Christ to set up world government, right government, the government of God. That's the solution. That's the solution to the problems that we see today. For much more on these many prophecies, don't forget to order The United States and Britain in Prophecy, and then these two helpful booklets, excellent practical instructions, Solve Your Money Troubles and The Financial Law You Can't Afford to Ignore. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.